I bought that mountain house to escape, to finally have something that was just mine. After 52 years of giving, compromising, and putting everyone else first, I decided I deserved this one thing. The place sat on 15 acres, surrounded by pine trees and silence. No drama, no expectations, just peace. My name is Michael, and I'm a retired architect. I spent 30 years designing buildings for other people's dreams, while my own life became something I didn't even recognize anymore. My marriage ended 5 years ago, not with a bang, but with a slow, exhausting fade. My kids barely called. My ex-wife moved to Arizona with her new boyfriend. But that house, that mountain house, became my anchor, the place where I could finally breathe. I paid cash for it. $240,000, money I'd saved for exactly this moment, financial freedom, and a space where nobody could take anything from me ever again. That's when Rebecca came into the picture. Rebecca is my brother's wife, my sister-in-law. She's the type of person who walks into a room and immediately starts rearranging the furniture, not because anything needs changing, but because she needs to feel like she has control over something, over someone. She'd always been that way with me. Subtle comments about my life choices, questions about my finances, a forced laugh when I talked about my hobbies. But I'd learned to tune it out. Distance was my best defense. When I first showed my family the mountain house, I made one thing crystal clear. "This is mine," I said, not harshly, just factually. "It's where I come to be alone. I need that space." My brother nodded. My sister-in-law smiled that smile, the one that doesn't quite reach her eyes. 6 months later, I got a call from Rebecca. "Michael, I have the most amazing idea," she said. Her voice had that honey-sweet tone that made my stomach tighten. "That beautiful house of yours is sitting empty most of the time. Why don't you let me list it on Airbnb? I know so many people who'd love to rent something like that. You could be making thousands every month. Think about it. Passive income." I didn't think about it. I said no immediately. "Why would you just let it sit there unused?" she pressed. "It's such a waste. I'm just trying to help you, Michael. You worked so hard for that place. Shouldn't it be working for you?" The implication was clear. I was being selfish. I was being wasteful. I was throwing away money. I was ungrateful for her trying to help. I repeated myself. "Rebecca, I appreciate the offer, but no. That house is my sanctuary. I'm not interested in running a business out of it," she laughed, that sharp, dismissive laugh. "You're being ridiculous. It's just a house." It wasn't just a house. It was the first thing in my entire adult life that belonged completely to me. But I knew there was no point explaining that to her. People like Rebecca don't understand boundaries. They see them as challenges to overcome. I thought the conversation was over. I thought I'd made myself clear. I was wrong. 3 months later, I decided to drive up to the mountain house on a Friday afternoon. I needed the silence. I needed to remember why I'd bought the place in the first place. The drive takes about 4 hours from the city, and I'd been looking forward to it all week. Somewhere around mile marker 42, my phone started buzzing. Text after text. I didn't look at them while driving. I waited until I arrived at the house. The driveway was full of cars. My stomach dropped. There were 4 vehicles parked in front of my house, 2 sedans, an SUV, and a minivan. I could see people through the windows, moving around, using my space. I sat in my car for a full minute before I got out. The front door wasn't locked. I walked inside and found my living room full of strangers, a family, parents, 2 kids, grandparents. They were sitting on my furniture, using my kitchen, treating my sanctuary like it was a vacation rental. "Michael!" Rebecca appeared from around the corner, her smile frozen in place. "You weren't supposed to be here this weekend. I didn't put this on the calendar because I thought you said you'd be..." "What is this?" I asked quietly. "These are guests," Rebecca said, as if that explained everything. I've already got 3 more bookings for next month. Michael, you're going to make so much money. Look, they're lovely people. They're paying $200 a night. Do you realize how much that adds up to? I stood there in my own living room, surrounded by people I'd never met, using things I'd bought with my own money, living in a space I'd carefully cultivated as mine and mine alone. And Rebecca was smiling like she'd done me a favor. "How did you even do this?" I asked. "How did you list the property?" "Oh, I used one of your photos from Facebook and created an account," she said casually. "I put your address and everything. I've already got inquiries from—" "You what?" "I created an Airbnb listing," Rebecca repeated, speaking slower like I was having trouble understanding English. "Your house is already getting 4-star reviews. People love it. You're welcome, by the way." I felt something shift inside me, not anger exactly, something colder than anger, something that felt like clarity. I asked Rebecca to step outside with me. The family watched as we went out onto the porch, their vacation interrupted by the man whose house they were renting without his permission. "You need to cancel every booking," I said. "Michael, don't be dramatic. This is a wonderful opportunity. You could be making—" "I don't care," I said. "Cancel them, today. You had no right to do this. You used my photos. You used my address. You put strangers in my house without my permission. That's fraud." Rebecca's face changed. The smile disappeared. What replaced it was something uglier, something that looked like contempt. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "You're selfish. You always have been. You have this beautiful property, and you're too self-absorbed to actually use it to make money. My husband talks about how you've always been like this, how you never help the family, never contribute, just take and take. And now you won't even let the rest of us benefit from your good fortune. You're pathetic, Michael. You know that? You're a lonely old man who's going to die with a beautiful house and no one to share it with." I stood there listening to her, and I realized something. I realized that no matter what I said, no matter how reasonable I was, Rebecca wasn't going to accept it. Because this wasn't about helping me make money. This was about control. This was about proving that she could do what she wanted, and I would just have to accept it. She was testing me. And I had failed by simply asking nicely. "Cancel the bookings," I said again, "or I'm calling the police." Rebecca laughed. "And tell them what? That your sister-in-law tried to help you make money? Good luck with that, Michael." But she didn't know I'd already checked. I'd already looked up the laws, creating an account in someone else's name, listing their property without permission, collecting money from renters. That was identity fraud. That was fraud, period. That was illegal. I pulled out my phone right there on the porch and called the police non-emergency line. Rebecca's face went pale. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "What I should have done the moment I walked into my own house and found it full of strangers," I said. "Protecting what's mine," the dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation calmly. A woman had created fraudulent listings for my property without my permission. She had collected payment from renters. She had granted access to my home to people I didn't know. No, I don't want to press charges at this moment. I just need an official report filed. I need documentation. Within 40 minutes, 2 police officers arrived at the mountain house. Rebecca tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to help her brother-in-law, that she'd meant no harm. But the officer wasn't interested in her explanations. He was interested in the facts. The facts were, the property was in my name. The Airbnb account was created with my photos and information without my consent. Payments had been collected. That was fraud. "We're filing a report," the officer said to me. "If you want to pursue charges later, you have documentation of this incident." The family inside the house had to leave. They weren't happy about it. Rebecca had to tell them to pack their things and get out. I watched from the porch as they loaded up their cars, confused and frustrated, their vacation ruined because my sister-in-law had committed fraud in my name. Rebecca left last. She didn't say anything to me. She just got in her car and drove away, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. But this wasn't over. Not really. Because Rebecca wasn't the type of person to accept consequences. She was the type of person to find another way, to retaliate, to make me pay for not playing along with her game, and that's when things got really interesting. That night, alone in my mountain house, finally alone, I sat on my porch and thought about what had just happened. I thought about how I'd spent my entire life making concessions, how I'd let people like Rebecca push me around because it was easier than conflict, how I'd taught everyone around me that my boundaries were negotiable if they pushed hard enough. I thought about how I'd bought this house to escape all of that, to finally have one space where I didn't have to compromise, where I didn't have to explain or justify or apologize for wanting something that was just mine. And I realized something else. Rebecca wasn't going to stop, not with the Airbnb scheme anyway. But there were other things she'd been doing, subtle things, things I'd been too polite or too tired to address before. Like the loans from my brother that never got repaid. Like the family vacations she organized at upscale resorts and then expected me to split equally, even though I hadn't chosen to go. Like the way she'd mentioned to my brother that I wasn't contributing enough to the family and suggested I should be paying for more of our parents' care, even though my brother had more money than I did. I'd let all of that slide. I'd been accommodating. I'd been the nice guy, and tonight, standing in the dark on my porch, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the nice guy anymore, not with Rebecca, not with anyone. If she wanted to test me, fine. Let her test me. But she was going to find out that I wasn't the pushover she thought I was. I wasn't the lonely old man she described on my porch. I was someone who'd worked hard his entire life, who'd made smart financial decisions, who'd learned exactly what he needed and what he didn't, and I was done making concessions. The question wasn't what Rebecca would do next. The question was what I was going to do about it, and that's where this story gets really interesting, because Rebecca had no idea who she was actually dealing with. She thought I was just a retired architect with a mountain house. She didn't know that I'd spent 3 decades understanding systems, understanding structures, understanding exactly how things worked, and how to make them work for me. She was about to find out. My brother called me 3 days after the police left my house. "Michael, what the hell did you do?" His voice was tight, controlled anger barely contained. "Rebecca is devastated. She was just trying to help you." I'd known this call was coming. I'd mentally rehearsed it 100 times, but hearing the accusation in my brother's voice still hit different, because my brother, Tom, was the one person I'd thought might actually understand. We'd grown up together. We'd watched our father control our mother, watched him dismiss her opinions, watched him use money as a weapon. I thought Tom had learned from that. I thought he'd be different. Apparently, I was wrong. "She committed fraud in my name," I said calmly. "She created an account using my photos and my address. She collected payment from strangers without my permission. That's not helping, Tom, that's theft." "It's not theft if it's family," Tom said. Those 6 words told me everything I needed to know about the dynamic I was dealing with. It's not theft if it's family, which meant rules don't apply to us, which meant I should just accept whatever Rebecca wanted to do because family was supposed to be unconditional, which meant my boundaries were less important than her desires. "It's exactly theft," I said quietly. "Legal definition doesn't change based on who's doing the stealing." "You're being technical and cold," Tom said. "Rebecca was excited about helping you build wealth. She saw an opportunity and she took it. Now she's humiliated. The family's embarrassed, and you made it worse by calling the police like she's some kind of criminal." "She is a criminal," I said. She committed fraud. She's your sister-in-law, she's family. I'd heard enough. Tom, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. I love you. I always have. But I'm not going to apologize for protecting what's mine. Rebecca crossed a line. She knew it was wrong, or she wouldn't have hidden it from me. She knew I'd said no, and she did it anyway. That's not love. That's not family. That's entitlement and control. Tom was quiet for a moment. Then, Mom thinks you're being unreasonable too. Of course she did. Mom can think whatever she wants, I said, but I'm not changing my position. If Rebecca wants to make this right, she can take down the listings, return the money she collected, and apologize. Until then, I'm done with this conversation. I hung up. That was a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had 3 text messages from my mother, 2 emails from my brother, and a voicemail from my sister asking me to be reasonable and think about what this is doing to the family. By Thursday, my niece posted something on social media that didn't mention me by name, but was clearly directed at me. Some people are just too selfish to understand what it means to be a family. I ignored all of it. What I didn't ignore was what happened the following Monday. I got a call from my bank. There was a dispute on my account. Someone had claimed that a transfer I'd made 6 months ago, a transfer to help my brother pay for his daughter's braces, was unauthorized and fraudulent. The claim was filed by someone named Rebecca Martinez. My sister-in-law was claiming I'd stolen money from them. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud when the bank representative explained this. "Sir, I understand this might seem surprising," the representative said, clearly not understanding anything. "No," I said. "I understand exactly what's happening. This is retaliation. I didn't steal anything. I voluntarily gave my brother money to help with his family expenses. He accepted it. There's been no problem until I refused to let his wife commit fraud in my name." I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with the bank providing documentation, email chains with my brother thanking me for the help, texts saying he'd pay me back when things settled down, proof that I'd initiated the transfer, that the money had gone to an account I'd helped set up years ago. The bank ultimately ruled in my favor. The dispute was closed. Rebecca's claim was denied. But here's the thing about making an enemy out of someone like Rebecca. She doesn't stop, she adapts. That's when the emails started. They came to my work email. I was consulting part-time for an architecture firm in the city. Nothing serious, just enough to keep my mind sharp and my bank account fuller. The emails were from someone claiming to be a concerned citizen, alleging that I'd made inappropriate comments about female interns at the firm. The allegations were vague but damaging, the kind of thing that, even when proven false, leaves a stain. I knew immediately who was behind it. I had no proof, but I knew. I reported it to my firm's HR department. I provided context about my sister-in-law's recent behavior. I offered to give them my phone records, my emails, anything they needed to verify that these allegations were fabricated. My firm believed me. They'd known me for years. They knew my reputation. But the damage was done in a different way now. I'd wasted time. I'd had to justify myself. I'd had to sit through a meeting with HR where I had to defend my character against anonymous accusations. That was the real goal. Not to get me fired, to make my life difficult, to make me regret standing up to her. I was starting to understand Rebecca's playbook. She couldn't control me directly, so she was trying to isolate me, turn the family against me, damage my reputation professionally, make me so exhausted by the constant attacks that I'd eventually capitulate, that I'd apologize for standing up to her and agree to whatever she wanted. It wasn't going to work, but I had to admit she was smart about it. That Friday, I drove back to the mountain house. I needed to think. I needed to be away from the city and the drama and the endless text messages from family members telling me I was wrong. The drive was quiet. I had a lot of time to think about choices, about how I'd spent my entire life being the reasonable one, the one who didn't make waves, the one who accommodated other people's desires at the expense of my own, the one who believed that if I was just kind enough, just understanding enough, just flexible enough, that people would respect my boundaries. I'd been wrong. Boundaries aren't respected because they're reasonable. They're respected because the person setting them is willing to enforce them. And I'd never been willing before. I'd always backed down. I'd always found a way to compromise or apologize or see the other person's perspective. Rebecca had learned that about me. She'd been testing it for years. Small manipulations, subtle jabs, nothing big enough to justify real conflict. And I'd let her keep pushing and pushing because I didn't want drama, because I wanted to be the good guy. Well, I was done being the good guy. By the time I reached the mountain house, I'd made some decisions. First, I was going to document everything. Every interaction with Rebecca, every retaliation, every lie. I was going to build a file so detailed and so organized that if she escalated to something serious, I'd have ironclad evidence of a pattern of harassment and fraud. Second, I was going to stop trying to convince my family that Rebecca was wrong. They'd made their choice. They'd believed her version of events. They'd sided with her. That told me everything I needed to know about their priorities, and I was going to stop letting their approval matter to me. Third, I was going to make sure Rebecca understood that I wasn't someone to be pushed around anymore, not through aggression, not through retaliation of my own, but through absolute, unwavering consistency, through boundary setting that couldn't be negotiated or manipulated, through actions that proved I meant what I said. And fourth, this was the important one, I was going to make sure that when this was all over, Rebecca understood exactly what it cost to test me. I sat on my porch that night, the same porch where I'd made my decision to stop being a pushover, and I planned, because I'd spent 30 years in architecture, understanding how systems worked, understanding structure and balance and how removing one element could cause everything else to shift. I understood leverage. I understood how to build something that was unassailable. And I was about to use all of that knowledge in a very different way. Rebecca thought she was dealing with a lonely old man who'd be too conflict-averse to really fight back. Rebecca was about to discover her mistake. The next part of this story, the part where things really changed, started with a single phone call to a lawyer. The lawyer's name was David Chen, and he specialized in family law and fraud cases. I'd found him through a recommendation from a colleague at the architecture firm, and when I walked into his office on a Tuesday morning with a folder full of documentation, he listened carefully to everything I had to say without interrupting. By the time I finished, David was leaning back in his chair with an expression that told me he'd seen this kind of situation before. "You have a strong case," he said. "The Airbnb fraud is clear-cut. Creating an account in your name, using your photos, collecting payment, that's identity theft and wire fraud. The bank dispute is retaliation. The emails to your employer are defamation if they're provably false. Which they are, because you have no history of any such behavior, and your firm backs you up. I don't want to press charges against her," I said carefully. "I just want her to stop." David nodded. "I understand. But sometimes, people like your sister-in-law don't stop until they understand there are real consequences. Real, legal consequences, not just social ones." He explained my options. I could file a police report for the Airbnb fraud and press charges. I could pursue a civil lawsuit for identity theft and defamation. I could file a restraining order based on the pattern of harassment. Or, and this was the option David recommended, I could send her a cease and desist letter, professional, documented, making it clear that if she continued, the next step would be legal action. The letter alone sometimes does the trick, David said, because once it's in writing from a lawyer, people realize this has escalated beyond family drama. This is real. I took his advice. David drafted the letter. It was 3 pages of carefully worded legal language that essentially said, "Stop contacting me. Stop spreading false accusations. Stop any attempt to access my property or use my identity or face criminal and civil charges." It outlined the specific incidents: the Airbnb fraud, the bank dispute, the emails to my employer, and made it clear that documentation existed for all of it. The letter was delivered to Rebecca's house by a courier service on a Thursday afternoon. My brother called me 20 minutes later. "What is this?" he demanded. His voice had lost the controlled anger. Now it was just panic. "A cease and desist? Michael, are you serious? You're sending her legal threats?" "I'm setting a boundary," I said. "A clear one. No more manipulation, no more retaliation, no more crossing lines. She's your family. She's someone who committed fraud in my name and then attacked me when I refused to let her get away with it," I said. "And she did it using all of you as cover. She knew that if she wrapped it in family helping family, you'd all back her up. She was right. You all did." Tom tried to argue. He tried to explain Rebecca's perspective, her intentions, her feelings. He asked me to reconsider, to be the bigger person, to think about what this was doing to the family. I listened to all of it, and then I said something I'd never said to my brother before. "I'm done compromising with people who don't respect me. Rebecca doesn't respect me. You don't respect me either, because if you did, you wouldn't be asking me to accept her behavior. You wouldn't be siding with her. You would have asked her to apologize and make this right. But you didn't. So I'm going to set this boundary alone, and if that's a problem for you, then we have bigger issues than Rebecca." I hung up. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Before, it had been the silence of anticipation, waiting for the next drama. Now, it was the silence of consequence, of a line being drawn that couldn't be uncrossed. Rebecca didn't contact me after the cease and desist. Neither did my brother. My mother sent one more email asking me to reconsider this path before she had to make some difficult decisions. I didn't respond. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The quiet was almost unsettling after months of chaos. Then I got a call from my parents' financial advisor. "Your mother called," the advisor said carefully. "She wants to change her will. She wants to discuss removing you as executor and redistributing your inheritance." I wasn't shocked. This was the nuclear option, the one my mother had threatened via email. This was her way of showing me that my choice to stand up to Rebecca had consequences, real consequences. Financial ones. "I understand," I told the advisor. "She's an adult. She can do what she wants with her estate." "Don't you want to discuss it with her first?" the advisor asked. "No," I said, "because if she's willing to punish me financially for setting a boundary with her daughter-in-law, then we don't actually have the kind of relationship I thought we did, and I'd rather find that out now than discover it later." After I hung up, I sat with that reality for a while. My mother was willing to rewrite her will because I'd refused to accept her daughter-in-law's fraud. My brother was willing to side with Rebecca instead of standing up for what was right. My sister wasn't returning my calls. My niece was posting passive-aggressive stuff on social media. I had set a boundary, and it had cost me my family. But here's the thing I realized sitting alone in my apartment that night. I'd already lost my family. I'd lost them the moment I decided that my own peace and my own integrity weren't worth compromising. I'd lost them when they decided that Rebecca's comfort was more important than my dignity. I'd lost them when they treated me like the problem instead of the person being victimized. What I'd actually done was just stop pretending I still had them. The following Monday, I made some calls. First, I called my accountant and asked her to help me restructure my finances. I had a retirement plan that was still tied to family investments, some assets that were commingled with my brother's, a few other financial entanglements that had accumulated over the years. I wanted to untangle all of it. I wanted complete separation. "This is going to take some time," my accountant said, "and it might be expensive." "Do it anyway," I said. "I want clean breaks." Next, I called David Chen and asked him to draw up documents, putting the mountain house in a trust with specific provisions. I wanted it protected. I wanted it clear that only I could authorize access. Only I could make decisions about how it was used. Only I could sell it or rent it or do anything with it. I wanted it fortress. "Are you expecting her to try something else?" David asked. "I'm making sure she can't," I said. "I'm done being reactive. Now I'm being proactive." Finally, I called my brother. Not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to tell him something important. "Tom, I'm going to be honest with you," I said when he answered. "I'm done trying to convince you or Mom or anyone else that I was right. You made your choice. Rebecca made her choice, and I've made mine. Michael, don't do this. I'm putting the mountain house in a trust," I continued, not letting him interrupt. "I'm separating all my finances from yours. I'm going to change my will and my insurance beneficiaries, and I'm going to move forward with my life in a way that doesn't include space for people who don't respect my boundaries." "You're being dramatic," Tom said weakly. "No," I said. "I'm being clear. You have one opportunity to make this right. Rebecca needs to admit what she did, apologize, and agree in writing never to contact me again. If that doesn't happen within 30 days, I'm filing charges for fraud and pressing forward with legal action. And I'm done considering you family until you figure out which side you're actually on." I gave him the timeline and hung up. 30 days passed. Rebecca didn't apologize. My brother didn't reach out with an olive branch. My mother called once, but when I didn't answer, she didn't leave a message. I filed charges with the police. I worked with David to send a formal lawsuit filing for identity theft and defamation. Everything was documented. Everything was legal. Everything was final. But here's where this story takes a turn that nobody expected, including me. A week after I filed charges, I got a call from my brother. His voice was different, smaller, like something had broken inside him. "I need to see you," he said. "Can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop halfway between the city and the mountain house. Tom looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red. He'd lost weight. "Rebecca left me," he said without preamble. 2 days ago. She packed her things and moved in with her sister. She's saying I never stood up for her, that I let you destroy our family, that I'm weak. I didn't say anything, I just listened. She took $40,000 from our joint account before she left," Tom continued. "Money I didn't know about. Money she'd been skimming from our accounts for months. Apparently the Airbnb scheme wasn't her first venture into unauthorized financial activity. There were others. Credit cards in my name. Loans she took out. Michael, she's cleaned us out. She's destroyed my credit. And when I confronted her about it, she blamed me. She said I drove her to it by not supporting her entrepreneurial spirit. I watched my brother fall apart across a coffee table at a public cafe, and I felt something complicated. I felt vindicated. I felt angry on his behalf. I felt sad that it had taken this much damage for him to see what I'd already seen. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm filing for divorce," Tom said. "I'm going to have her arrested for fraud. I'm going to take back my life." He looked at me. "And I'm going to apologize to you because you were right about all of it. And I chose not to believe you because it was easier. Because I didn't want to accept that I'd married a manipulative, narcissistic person who had been playing all of us." "Tom, let me finish," he said. "Mom called me yesterday. She said she's reversing the changes to her will. She said she's been thinking about what you said about respect and boundaries, and she realized she was doing exactly what Dad used to do, using money to control us. She wants to make things right." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not asking you to forgive everyone," Tom said. "I'm just telling you that you were right, and your willingness to actually enforce your boundaries, to follow through with legal action when we didn't respect them, that actually saved me. because it forced me to look at my marriage clearly. It forced me to see Rebecca for who she really was. That's when I understood something crucial about boundaries. They're not just about protecting yourself. They're about creating space for truth. When you refuse to participate in someone's lies, when you hold firm to reality, even when everyone around you is pretending, you create an opportunity for other people to wake up. My brother had woken up. My mother was starting to. Rebecca had shown her true nature, and it had fractured her from everyone. Over the next few months, the situation resolved itself in ways I couldn't have predicted. Rebecca was arrested for fraud related to the credit card accounts and loans she'd taken in my brother's name. She ended up taking a plea deal. The charges were reduced. She had to pay restitution and serve probation. My brother's divorce was finalized quickly. He got primary custody of their daughter. Rebecca didn't fight it. She moved across the country to live with her sister. My mother did reverse the will changes. She also went to therapy and spent time examining how her patterns of control had created an environment where people like Rebecca could thrive. And me, I went back to my mountain house. I sat on my porch where this entire journey had started, and I thought about what I'd learned. I'd learned that sometimes protecting yourself means hurting the people around you. That's a cost worth paying if those people are more invested in controlling you than supporting you. I'd learned that real boundaries have teeth. They're not suggestions or negotiations. They're lines that you will defend legally and personally with whatever resources you have. I'd learned that the people who matter, the people who really love you, will eventually understand, and the people who don't, well, they'll reveal themselves through their actions. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was worth respecting. My time was worth protecting. My peace was worth fighting for. And I was never going to apologize for that again. 6 months after the police filed charges against Rebecca, I received an unexpected email. It came from someone named Victoria, who identified herself as Rebecca's sister. The subject line read, "I think you should know what happened." I almost deleted it. My first instinct was to protect my peace by avoiding anything connected to Rebecca, but something made me open it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me that wanted closure. Either way, I read it. Victoria explained that after Rebecca's arrest and the fallout from her fraud, Rebecca had spiraled. She'd spent months angry, defensive, blaming everyone else for her problems. But recently, within the last month, something had shifted. Rebecca had finally admitted to herself that she'd been wrong, not just about the Airbnb scheme, but about everything. She'd been exploiting people her entire life. She'd been manipulating everyone around her, and it had finally caught up with her. Victoria wrote that Rebecca wanted to reach out and apologize. She wanted to make amends, but she was terrified that I'd reject her outright. And honestly, she deserved to be rejected. Victoria was just letting me know, in case I ever wanted to hear her sister's apology. No pressure. I thought about that email for a long time. I'd spent months being angry at Rebecca. I'd pursued legal action, enforced boundaries, made sure she understood there were consequences for her actions. And all of that was necessary and right. But now, reading Victoria's email, I realized something. I didn't want to carry anger anymore. I didn't need Rebecca's apology to move forward. I'd already moved forward, but maybe, just maybe, she needed to give it. I emailed Victoria back and agreed to a meeting, not because I was forgiving Rebecca, not because I was reopening the door for her to manipulate me again, but because I'd learned something important through all of this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is give someone the opportunity to do better, while making absolutely clear that you don't need them to. Rebecca and I met at a neutral location, a park bench near downtown. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. She'd lost weight. Her hair was different. But more than that, something in her face was different. The sharp edges of her manipulation seemed to have worn down into something like vulnerability. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Rebecca said immediately. "I just wanted to say that I was wrong. I was wrong about the Airbnb scheme. I was wrong to create the account without your permission. I was wrong to use your identity. I was wrong about everything." I listened to her. I didn't interrupt. I didn't soften my expression or make it easier for her. When you reported me to the police, when you sent that cease and desist letter, when you actually followed through with legal action, I hated you for that, Rebecca continued. I spent months telling myself you were the villain, that you'd overreacted, that you were selfish and cold. But eventually, I had to admit to myself that you were right. You'd set a boundary. I violated it. And when I violated it, you enforced it. That's not villainous. That's actually the only way people like me ever learn. People like you? I asked. People who think they're smarter than everyone else, Rebecca said. People who believe their ambition or their intelligence or their creativity justifies breaking the rules. People who see boundaries as challenges instead of limits. I've been like that my entire life. I've left a trail of damage everywhere I've gone, and I never stopped until someone actually made me stop. I considered what she was saying. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as another manipulation, another attempt to get me to lower my guard. But I also recognized the genuine pain in her voice, the real regret. "I'm not going to tell you I forgive you," I said carefully, "because forgiveness isn't something you're owed. It's something that happens or doesn't on my timeline. What I will tell you is that I hope you use this as an opportunity to actually change, not for my benefit, for yours." "I know," Rebecca said quietly. "I'm in therapy, real therapy, not just going through the motions. I'm working with someone on why I have this need to control everything and everyone around me. It's going to take a long time." "It will," I agreed. "And you're probably going to fail sometimes. You're probably going to slip back into old patterns. That's how change works." We talked for another 20 minutes. Not friendly conversation, but honest conversation. I explained to Rebecca how her actions had affected me, how they'd affected my relationship with my family, how she'd forced me to make changes to my life and my finances to protect myself. I made sure she understood the full weight of what she'd done. And Rebecca listened. She didn't make excuses. She didn't try to justify. She just heard what I had to say and accepted it. Before we left, I told her one more thing. "I'm not inviting you back into my life," I said. "And I'm not going to drop the legal case. You need to face those consequences. That's part of your growth. But if you genuinely change, if years from now you're a different person, then maybe I can think of you differently. But that's not happening today. Today, I'm just here because I wanted to see if you were capable of genuine remorse. And maybe you are. I guess we'll see." Rebecca nodded. She didn't cry or beg or try to convince me otherwise. She just said thank you and left. I never heard from her again. Our legal case concluded. She paid the restitution the court ordered. She served her probation. Last I heard, she'd moved to Portland and was working as a counselor, ironically helping people navigate family conflicts. Whether that was genuine or another persona, I had no way of knowing, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. What mattered was what I'd learned about myself through all of this. I'd learned that I was someone who could stand firm, that I could set boundaries and enforce them, that I didn't need everyone's approval to be okay with myself, that sometimes protecting your own peace means being willing to lose people, and that's not weakness, that's strength. After everything settled, I made some changes to my life. I stepped back completely from my family. Not with anger or resentment, but with clear intention. I saw my mother maybe twice a year. My brother and I rebuilt a cautious relationship, but I maintained distance. I didn't attend most family gatherings. I didn't participate in group chats or email chains. I carved out a life that was distinctly mine. At the mountain house, I stopped thinking of it as a retreat from the world. I started thinking of it as my home. I renovated it slowly, thoughtfully, creating spaces that reflected what I actually wanted instead of what I thought I should have. I joined a local community there. I made friends who had nothing to do with my old life. I dated a woman named Sarah, a teacher who lived in the small town near my property. We'd met at a farmer's market. She was straightforward, honest, and had strong boundaries of her own. We didn't play games. We didn't manipulate. We just existed together in a way that was clean and uncomplicated. A year after everything with Rebecca had resolved, my brother reached out and asked if we could have lunch. Not to rehash anything, just to catch up. We met at a restaurant halfway between the city and the mountains. Tom looked better, healthier, calmer, like he'd been doing his own work on himself. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for what you did, for holding that boundary with Rebecca even when we were all against you. I wasn't doing it to fix your life," I said. "I was doing it to save mine." "I know," Tom said, "but you saved mine anyway. By refusing to participate in her lies, by actually following through with consequences, you created space for me to see clearly. And I needed that. I needed that shock." I appreciated him saying that. But I also knew something that Tom was still learning. Sometimes people need to hit bottom before they change. Rebecca had hit bottom. Tom had hit his own version of it. And me, I'd hit bottom the moment I realized that no amount of accommodation and compromise was going to earn me respect from people who didn't value me. The difference was that I'd acted on that knowledge, and that action, that willingness to enforce my boundaries no matter the cost, had changed everything. As I drove back to the mountain house that evening, I thought about the man I'd been before all this happened. The man who'd bought the house to escape, but then let it be violated. The man who'd been afraid of conflict, so he let people walk over him. The man who'd apologized when he should have stood firm. That man didn't exist anymore. In his place was someone who understood that peace isn't something you find by giving in. Peace is something you create and defend. It requires saying no. It requires being willing to walk away. It requires accepting that not everyone will like you and being okay with that. Most importantly, it requires respecting yourself enough to believe that your boundaries matter. Sitting on my porch that night, the same porch where this entire journey had started, I realized that Rebecca had actually given me an incredible gift. She'd forced me to choose between comfort and integrity, between keeping the peace and standing up for myself. And I'd chosen integrity. That choice had cost me. It had cost me my place in my family. It had cost me the fantasy that my brother and mother would always have my back. It had cost me a lot of time and money on legal fees and therapy working through the trauma of it all. But it had given me something infinitely more valuable: myself. For the first time in my 52 years of life, I was living completely on my own terms. Not because I'd run away from people, but because I'd learned to run toward myself instead. And that, I'd come to understand, was worth everything. The mountain house wasn't an escape anymore. It was home, and I was finally truly at peace.